Daniel Carter sat in the corner booth of Romano's Grill, a mid-tier Italian restaurant tucked between a hardware store and a dental clinic on East Colfax Avenue in Denver. The vinyl seat beneath him had seen better decades patched with duct tape in 3 places, and the laminated menu bore coffee rings from 1,000 previous customers. He'd chosen this place deliberately, not too fancy to seem like he was trying too hard, not too cheap to suggest he didn't care, just right for a man who earned his living with calloused hands and a tool belt. His wallet lay open on his lap beneath the table hidden from view. Inside a single $50 bill, folded once crisp and new, because he'd gone to the bank specifically to exchange his worn 20s for something that looked intentional. Beside it, a 5 for emergencies and 2 ones for tipping. $57 total. The most he'd allowed himself to spend on anything that wasn't rent, utilities, or his son's college fund in 5 years. The clock above the bar read 6:45. She was supposed to arrive at 6:30. Traffic, he told himself. Denver traffic could turn a 15-minute drive into 40 on a Friday evening. He smoothed the front of his navy polo shirt, the one without any company logos or bleach stains, and checked his phone again. Their last exchange had been simple, promising. Her profile picture showed a woman with kind eyes and auburn hair. Her messages had been warm without being forward interested, without being aggressive. Normal. Safe. His phone buzzed. Daniel's chest constricted as he swiped the screen open. The first message appeared, "Wow, you actually went. I was just messing with you. Sorry, but you're not really my type. Not worth the Uber." The words blurred. He read them again, forcing his eyes to focus to make sense of letters that couldn't possibly say what they appeared to say. A second message followed before he could process the first. "You seem nice, but seriously, you thought I was actually coming. This is what you get for thinking you have a chance. Someone paid me $200 to troll you. Thanks for the entertainment, old man." The restaurant continued its Friday evening rhythm around him. Silverware clinked against plates. A couple at the bar laughed at something on their phones. The kitchen door swung open and shut, releasing bursts of garlic and basil into the dining room. Daniel sat frozen, the phone heavy in his hand, the screen casting a blue glow across his weathered face, movement in his peripheral vision. 3 young men at a table near the windows, early 20s, maybe, all hunched over their phones. One of them looked up, made eye contact with Daniel, and elbowed his companion. They weren't even trying to hide it. The one in the middle had his phone propped against a water glass camera pointed directly at Daniel's booth. The truth assembled itself in Daniel's mind with the methodical precision he used when diagnosing electrical problems. They'd set this up, paid someone to string him along for weeks to build his hope message by message to ensure he'd show up alone to a restaurant where they could document his humiliation in real time. The phone in the middle wasn't just recording. The angle was too deliberate, too steady. They were streaming. Daniel's first instinct was to leave, walk out the door, get in his truck, drive away from this moment, and pretend it had never happened. But his body wouldn't cooperate. His legs felt welded to the floor. Because leaving meant they'd won completely. Leaving meant giving them the final shot they wanted, the old fool fleeing in shame, the punchline walking itself out the door. He set his phone face down on the table and straightened his spine. His hands shook slightly as he reached for the water glass the server had left 20 minutes ago. The ice had mostly melted. He drank anyway, forcing the liquid past the tightness in his throat, buying time to think. The young men were openly staring now. One whispered something and the other snickered. A camera flash went off quick and bright. Daniel's stomach lurched. This would be online already. His humiliation being shared, commented on, turned into entertainment for people who'd never worked a hard day, never raised a child alone, never understood what it meant to show up even when the odds were against you. A woman at a nearby table glanced at her phone, then at Daniel, then back at her phone. Her expression shifted from curiosity to recognition to something approaching pity. She leaned toward her dining companion and murmured behind her hand. The companion looked too. Daniel felt the attention spreading like ripples in water, table by table, as more people checked their devices and connected the dots. He was becoming visible in the worst possible way. The waiter approached, young and professional, oblivious to the undercurrent. His name tag read Marcus. "Sir, are you ready to order, or are you still waiting for your party?" Daniel's throat was desert dry. The words came out rougher than he intended. "Still waiting." Marcus nodded, refilled the water glass, and moved on. Daniel wanted to stop him to order something just to have a reason to stay that didn't look pathetic. But $57 suddenly felt like an impossible fortune to spend on himself. He'd come here to share a meal. Eating alone while three strangers documented his solitude for a profit felt like surrender. His mind drifted back 6 hours to the moment when he'd told his son about tonight. Jake had been home for the weekend taking a break from his sophomore year at Metropolitan State University. They'd been in the kitchen, Daniel making his standard Friday evening meal, grilled chicken breast, steamed broccoli and brown rice measured on a food scale to stretch the grocery budget. Jake had been scrolling through his laptop, probably working on an assignment, when Daniel mentioned he wouldn't be home for dinner. "Got plans, Dad?" The hesitation must have been obvious because Jake looked up, curiosity sharpening his expression. "I'm meeting someone for dinner." Jake's face had transformed. Pure joy, unguarded and bright. "A date, Dad, that's amazing. Who is she? Where'd you meet her?" Daniel had felt his cheeks warm, embarrassed by his son's enthusiasm. "Online. We've been talking for a few weeks. Seems nice. We'll see." Jake had stood up, crossed the kitchen and hugged him. Actually hugged him, something his 19-year-old son reserved for major occasions. "You deserve this, Dad. You need to have a life beyond work and worrying about me." The memory of that hug burned now, adding another layer of shame to the evening. Jake would ask how it went. Daniel would have to explain. His son would be angry on his behalf, protective, ready to fight battles Daniel couldn't win. The thought of putting that burden on Jake felt heavier than any toolbox he'd ever carried. The three young men were laughing again, not even pretending to be subtle. One of them made a gesture toward Daniel, a mocking salute, and the others dissolved into fresh laughter. Daniel gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, fighting the urge to stand up and confront them. But what would that accomplish? More content for their stream? More proof that they'd gotten under his skin. A real man's worth isn't measured by how others see him, but by how he sees himself when no one's watching. The thought arrived unbidden, something his late wife Sarah had told him during their hardest years. She'd been the steady one, the voice of reason when his temper flared hot. She would have known what to do in this moment. She would have taken his hand, smiled that smile that made everything bearable, and reminded him that other people's cruelty said nothing about his value. But Sarah had been gone for 5 years, taken by an aneurysm so sudden that Daniel still sometimes reached for her side of the bed before remembering it would be cold. He checked the time. 7:15. He'd been sitting here for 45 minutes. How long before it became obvious to everyone that he'd been stood up? How long before the pity in those sideways glances turned to contempt? The door opened and a couple walked in, bundled against the October cold, their faces flushed from the wind that had been picking up all evening. They were younger than Daniel, maybe mid-30s, and they moved with the easy comfort of people who belonged together. The hostess greeted them by name and led them to a table. Regular customers. People with normal Friday evenings with partners who showed up with lives that didn't include being the subject of cruel social experiments. Daniel's phone buzzed again. For a desperate half-second, he hoped it might be an apology, a revelation that this had all been a misunderstanding. Instead, it was Mike. "How's the date going? Remember, be yourself. Women like guys who are genuine." The irony was acid in Daniel's mouth. He typed back quickly, "It's fine, talk later." Lying to Mike felt necessary. His best friend had been so supportive, so genuinely happy, that Daniel was putting himself out there again. Mike had been married to Linda for 32 years, and while they bickered constantly about everything from sports to politics, their foundation was solid. Mike couldn't comprehend the minefield that modern dating had become for men like Daniel. Men who were older, working class, unversed in the language of apps and algorithms. A flash of memory 3 weeks ago at the job site, Daniel had been running new electrical lines for a warehouse expansion, working alongside 2 younger electricians from another company. During lunch, one of them had been swiping through a dating app showing matches to his buddy. They'd laughed at profiles, made crude jokes about women's photos, discussed their strategies for maximizing hookups. Daniel had listened in uncomfortable silence, recognizing that whatever world they inhabited was foreign to him. He'd learned his trade through apprenticeship, learned relationships through years of marriage, and the current landscape felt like trying to read blueprints in a language he'd never studied. Marcus returned more hesitant this time. "Sir, our dinner rush is starting. If you'd like to order something while you wait." Daniel understood the subtext. The restaurant needed the table. he was taking up space without generating revenue. A perfectly reasonable business concern that nonetheless felt like one more small humiliation. I'll just take the check for the water. Oh no, sir, water is complimentary. I just thought you might want. I'm fine, thank you. Marcus retreated and Daniel immediately regretted his sharp tone. The kid was just doing his job. None of this was his fault. Daniel forced himself to take a breath to locate the composure that had carried him through 2 decades of difficult jobs and challenging clients. He could handle electrical systems with thousands of volts. He could handle this. But the thought rang hollow because voltage was predictable. Current followed laws. Electricity didn't mock you for sport. Another table of diners was looking at their phone, then at him. A teenage girl pointed and her mother shushed her, but not before Daniel caught the gesture. The viral video must be spreading faster than he'd imagined. How many people would see it? Hundreds. Thousands would his coworkers stumble across it. Would Jake's friends send it to him, not realizing the pathetic old man was his father? The walls of Romano's grill felt like they were contracting. The ambient noise of conversation and clinking dishes became oppressive. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. He needed to leave. Now. Before this got worse. Before more people recognized him. Before the humiliation crystallized into something permanent. His hand moved toward his wallet, ready to drop a few dollars on the table for Marcus's trouble and make his exit. But as he shifted his weight to stand, a voice cut through the restaurant's din. Excuse me. Daniel looked up. A woman stood beside his table, and for a confused moment he thought she might be his date, that this had all been a test of his patience, a setup for a different kind of story. But this woman bore no resemblance to the profile picture. She was taller, older, dressed in a charcoal blazer over a white blouse that spoke of boardrooms rather than casual dinners. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her eyes held an intensity that made Daniel sit back against the booth. I'm sorry to interrupt, she continued, her voice low enough that the surrounding tables couldn't hear. But I couldn't help noticing those three filming you. I assume you're aware, Arine. Daniel's confusion must have shown because she gestured subtly toward the young men with her chin. I'm aware. Are you involved in some kind of social media stunt? Because if not, what they're doing is harassment, possibly illegal depending on Colorado's recording consent laws. The clinical precision of her words, the way she framed the situation as a legal matter rather than a personal tragedy, created a strange distance. Daniel found his voice steadying. Not a stunt, just bad judgment on my part. Her expression didn't soften into pity, which he appreciated. Instead, she nodded once as if confirming a hypothesis. I see. Well, for what it's worth, their behavior reflects on them, not you. Showing up for something takes courage. Exploiting that for entertainment takes only cruelty. She turned to walk away, but something in Daniel's chest lurched. The evenness of her tone, the matter-of-fact delivery that treated him like a person rather than a spectacle, made him want to extend the moment. Do I know you? She paused, looked back, and studied his face. Recognition flickered across her features. Steel Core Industries. 2 months ago, the Denver plant had a voltage regulation issue that was tripping our main breakers. The memory clicked into place. Daniel had been called in by the facility manager, a man named Rodriguez, who'd been at his wit's end after 3 different electrical contractors had failed to diagnose the problem. Daniel had spent 4 hours tracing circuits, reviewing load calculations, and finally identifying that the issue wasn't the electrical system at all. Someone had installed industrial equipment with peak demands that exceeded the facility's main panel capacity. The solution had required both electrical upgrades and staggered equipment schedules. This woman had been there. He remembered her now standing in the back of the utility room in expensive shoes that had no business being around industrial equipment, asking questions that demonstrated she understood the technical explanations Rodriguez was giving her. You're the CEO. Victoria Sterling, and you're Daniel Carter, master electrician. You turned down my tip. The memory of that moment returned. She tried to hand him $200 bills cash as thanks for solving a problem that had been costing them thousands daily in lost production. Daniel had refused, explaining that he'd charged his standard rate and didn't take tips for doing his job. She'd looked at him then with the same intensity she was showing now, as if trying to solve a puzzle. I don't take money I didn't earn. I remember it's a rare quality. Victoria glanced at the 3 young men, her expression hardening. When she looked back at Daniel, something in her posture shifted. She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen a few times, and showed it to him. It was his face frozen mid-frame in a video titled, "Catfished Boomer Gets Wrecked." The view count was climbing past 15,000, even as Daniel watched. "This is going viral. Those kids are making money off your humiliation. You could file a complaint, potentially sue for damages, depending on how this was set up." Daniel's jaw tightened. The thought of lawyers, courts, the whole mess being dragged out into even more public view felt worse than just letting it fade. "I just want to go home." Victoria studied him for a long moment. Then she did something Daniel didn't expect. She sat down across from him in the booth, setting her phone on the table between them. "May I join you?" The question was rhetorical. She was already seated. Daniel's mind raced through possible explanations. Pity, some kind of corporate liability concern, but her expression held neither sympathy nor calculation. Just a direct level gaze that suggested she'd made a decision and was seeing it through. "I don't need charity." "Good, I'm not offering any. I'm offering dinner. There's a difference." "What difference?" "Charity assumes you need saving. Dinner assumes you're worth getting to know. I'm betting on the latter." Before Daniel could respond, Victoria raised her hand and Marcus appeared almost instantly, notepad ready. "Two of your ribeye specials, medium rare. Caesar salads, no anchovies. And bring us a bottle of your Malbec." She looked at Daniel. "Unless you prefer beer." Daniel's head spun. This was happening too fast, the evening careening from one extreme to another without letting him catch his breath. "I don't drink when I'm driving." "Smart. Make that one glass of Malbec and a ginger ale." She handed Marcus her credit card. "Start a tab. Everything goes on this." Marcus disappeared and Victoria turned her full attention back to Daniel. The three young men were watching now, confused by this development, their camera still recording but capturing a narrative they hadn't planned for. "I have $57, Daniel said, his voice rough. "I can pay for my own meal." "I'm sure you can, but I invited myself to your table. That makes this my treat. Besides, I have a business proposition for you, which makes this a working dinner. Steel Core can expense it." "What kind of business proposition?" "The kind where I need someone who knows the difference between theoretical electrical engineering and practical field application. But we can discuss that after we eat. Right now, I'm more interested in why those three idiots thought humiliating a stranger would be entertaining." Daniel found himself explaining, despite his intention to remain guarded. The dating app, the weeks of conversation, the growing hope that maybe after 5 years alone, he could find something resembling companionship again. The messages tonight, the revelation that he'd been a mark, a target entertainment for an audience of strangers who'd never consider that the person behind the screen had feelings, dignity, a life beyond the frame. Victoria listened without interrupting, her expression neutral but her attention absolute. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine Marcus had brought. The cruelty of strangers used to require physical proximity. Now it can reach anyone anywhere, and they never have to see the damage they cause. She took a sip. "But here's what I've learned in 20 years of running a company. The people who get entertainment from others' pain are the ones who've never built anything worth protecting. They're empty, and eventually that emptiness consumes them." The words carried weight, not platitude. Daniel sensed she was speaking from experience, though he couldn't yet see the shape of it. "Doesn't change the fact that thousands of people are watching me sit alone in a restaurant right now. Actually, they're watching you have dinner with the CEO of a Fortune 500 manufacturing company. That's a different story. Not the one they wanted, but possibly a better one." The steaks arrived perfectly cooked, accompanied by roasted vegetables and garlic mashed potatoes that sent steam curling toward the ceiling. Daniel's stomach reminded him that he'd skipped lunch, too nervous about tonight to eat. The $50 bill in his wallet suddenly felt like a relic from another life, one where he'd thought this evening might end with shared dessert and plans for a second date. Victoria cut into her steak with surgical precision. "Tell me about Steel Core's electrical systems. What did you think of the overall infrastructure when you were there?" The question was so unexpected that Daniel answered, automatically slipping into the comfortable language of circuits and loads and capacity planning. He described what he'd observed: equipment that was high quality, but aging, a facility that had been expanded multiple times without comprehensive electrical redesign, potential issues brewing in their backup generator systems. Victoria absorbed every word, occasionally asking questions that revealed her technical knowledge wasn't superficial. She understood power factor correction, could discuss transformer ratings, knew the difference between single-phase and three-phase applications. Their conversation drifted from steel core specifically to industrial electrical work in general, to the challenges of maintaining old infrastructure while integrating new technology. Daniel found himself relaxing incrementally. This woman wasn't trying to fix him or rescue him. She was engaging with him on his own terms, in his area of expertise, treating his knowledge as valuable rather than quaint. The shift was subtle but profound. The three young men left at some point. Daniel didn't notice exactly when. The other diners stopped glancing at their phones. Romano's Grill returned to being just a restaurant, its Friday evening energy flowing around them without targeting them. Victoria finished her wine and leaned back studying Daniel with an expression he couldn't quite read. I'm going to make you an uncomfortable offer. You can refuse and we'll part as friendly acquaintances. But I think you should hear me out. Daniel set down his fork, tension returning to his shoulders. Steel Core needs a consultant, someone who can work with our engineering team to audit our electrical systems across all 6 facilities. Someone who understands both the technical requirements and the practical realities of industrial operations. The position would pay $150 an hour, flexible schedule, probably 6 months of part-time work. Maybe longer if we find other issues. The numbers didn't compute. $150 an hour was more than triple Daniel's current rate. 6 months of part-time consulting would exceed his annual salary from his regular electrical work. Why me? Because when you were at our Denver plant, you didn't just fix the immediate problem. You gave Rodriguez a 20-page report detailing 7 other potential issues you'd noticed, with prioritized recommendations for addressing them. You weren't paid to do that. You did it because it was the right thing to do. That level of thoroughness, that commitment to actually solving problems rather than just collecting a check, is exactly what we need. Daniel's mind was churning. The offer was too good. There had to be a catch, some hidden expectation. This doesn't have anything to do with tonight, with what happened. Victoria's expression didn't flicker. Tonight factors in exactly 0%. I was already planning to reach out to you next week. Seeing you here just accelerated the timeline. If anything, I should apologize for approaching you in the middle of a difficult evening, but I'm not good at patience when I see an opportunity. I'd need to think about it. Of course, take a week. Here's my card. She slid a business card across the table, embossed letters on heavy stock. Call my direct line when you decide. If yes, we'll work out the details. If no, we had a nice dinner and I got some valuable feedback on our electrical infrastructure. Either way, you don't owe me anything. The check never came. Victoria had already settled it when she gave Marcus her card at the beginning of the meal. They stood, Daniel's legs stiff from sitting too long, his mind overfull with information he'd need hours to process. At the door, Victoria extended her hand. Her grip was firm, professional, the handshake of someone who sealed deals worth millions. For what it's worth, Mr. Carter showing up tonight took courage. What those kids did was wrong. But you handled it with more dignity than most people could manage. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. She walked to her car, a sleek German sedan that probably cost more than Daniel's truck would fetch in 5 years of trade-ins. He watched her go, then looked back at the restaurant. Through the window, he could see his former booth empty, now ready for the next customer. The evening had been a disaster that somehow hadn't ended in disaster. He wasn't sure what to call that. The drive home took 20 minutes, Denver's Friday traffic thinning as he headed east toward his apartment complex. The building was one of thousands like it scattered across the city, 3 stories of brown brick, external staircases, parking lot, with half the light fixtures burnt out. Daniel had lived here for 8 years, ever since downsizing from the house he'd shared with Sarah. The mortgage had been unmanageable on his salary alone, and Jake had needed college savings more than Daniel needed extra bedrooms filled with memories. His unit was on the second-floor corner location, which meant slightly more natural light and slightly more noise from the street. He unlocked the door and stepped into the familiar space. Clean but sparse. The furniture was secondhand, but maintained the walls bare, except for a few framed photos, Sarah on their wedding day, Jake's high school graduation, a picture of all 3 of them from Jake's 10th birthday before the world became complicated. Daniel dropped his keys in the bowl by the door and stood in the silence. The evening replayed in fragments. The cruelty of those messages. The humiliation of being filmed. Victoria's unexpected intervention. The job offer that didn't make sense. He pulled out her business card and read it again under the harsh fluorescent kitchen light. Victoria Sterling, Chief Executive Officer, Steel Core Industries. Phone, email, nothing fancy, just information. But the weight of it felt significant. His phone buzzed. Jake. How'd it go, Dad? Daniel closed his eyes. He couldn't lie to his son, but he also couldn't dump the full truth on him right now. Complicated. She didn't show up. The pause on the other end carried disappointment. Seriously, what happened? Long story. I'll explain tomorrow. But I'm okay, really. You sure I can drive up tonight if you need company? The offer touched something raw in Daniel's chest. Jake was good that way, always ready to drop everything for family. Sarah's best trait passed down. Stay put, finish your homework. I'm just going to watch some TV and crash early. They talked for a few more minutes, Jake clearly not convinced, but respecting his father's boundaries. After hanging up, Daniel stood in his kitchen and admitted the truth to himself. He wasn't okay. Tonight had scraped something fundamental, exposed the raw reality that he was 52 years old alone and apparently foolish enough to believe that someone might actually want to spend time with him. But there was also Victoria's card on the counter. Her offer. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, this disaster of an evening had pivoted towards something else entirely. Daniel made coffee even though it was almost 9, and caffeine this late would keep him up. He didn't care. Sleep felt impossible anyway. He sat at his small kitchen table, the one that wobbled unless you knew to put the folded napkin under the short leg, and opened his laptop. The dating app was still there, his profile still active. He deleted it without ceremony, then cleared his browser history for good measure. Then, because he couldn't help himself, he searched for the video, found it immediately. The view count had climbed past 50,000. The comments were worse than he'd imagined. Mockery speculation about what was wrong with him, jokes about old men trying to date, memes already spawning from frozen frames of his face. He closed the browser before the full weight of it could settle. Tomorrow he'd figure out how to respond to Victoria's offer. Tomorrow he'd call Mike and explain what happened. Tomorrow he'd start putting tonight into perspective. But right now, sitting in his worn kitchen chair with cold coffee and the memory of $57 still in his wallet, Daniel Carter allowed himself to feel exactly what he was feeling. Humiliated, angry, hurt. And beneath all of that, something else. A small, stubborn ember that refused to go out completely. The same ember that had kept him going after Sarah died. That had pushed him to be both father and mother to Jake. That had driven him to master his trade, to become the kind of electrician other contractors called when they couldn't figure it out themselves. That made him show up, even when showing up meant risking exactly what had happened tonight. Daniel picked up Victoria's card one more time, read her name, her title, her direct phone number. She'd called tonight courage. He'd called it stupidity. Maybe they were both right. Maybe courage and stupidity looked identical until you knew how the story ended. He set the card on the refrigerator, held in place by a magnet shaped like Colorado. Then he went to bed, leaving his work clothes laid out for tomorrow, his boots by the door, his life arranged in the careful order of a man who'd learned that control over small things helped when big things fell apart. Outside Denver settled into its Friday night at rhythms. Somewhere people were still watching that video, still laughing at a man who dared to hope. And somewhere else, Victoria Sterling was probably reviewing quarterly reports or answering emails the evening's interruption already filed away in whatever mental system she used to organize her world. Daniel closed his eyes and tried to sleep, carrying with him the weight of what had happened and the uncertain promise of what might come next. The alarm pulled Daniel from shallow sleep at 5:30 Saturday morning. His body moved through its routine before his mind fully engaged shower coffee, work clothes from the floor where he'd laid them out. The Saturday shift at the Morrison job site started at 7, and the commute west into the foothills took 40 minutes if traffic cooperated. He was halfway through his second cup when his phone lit up with Mike's name. "You up?" Daniel grunted affirmation. "Linda's making breakfast burritos. Get over here before you head out." The drive to Mike and Linda's house took 12 minutes. They lived in a neighborhood that had been working class 30 years ago, and was now creeping toward gentrification, original residents hanging on while younger families with tech money moved in and renovated. Mike's truck sat in the driveway 20 years old but maintained like a showpiece. Pride in what you owned, even if what you owned was old. Linda met Daniel at the door with a foil-wrapped burrito and coffee in a travel mug. Mike's in the garage. Don't let him keep you too long or you'll be late. The garage smelled of motor oil and sawdust. Mike had converted half of it into a woodworking shop building furniture that he gave away to family because selling it felt too commercial. He was sanding a table leg when Daniel entered, safety glasses perched on his forehead. "So how'd it go?" Daniel unwrapped the burrito buying time. The eggs and chorizo were still hot. She didn't show. Mike set down the sandpaper, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern. What happened? The full story spilled out. The messages, the 3 kids filming, the viral video that Daniel had spent an hour reading comments on last night despite knowing better. Mike's jaw tightened with each detail, his hands curling into fists. "Give me their names. I'll find them." "It's done. It's online. Nothing changes it now." "The hell it doesn't. You file a complaint. Sue them. Make them hurt the way they hurt you." Daniel finished the burrito, crumpled the foil. "And then? What? Spend a year in court, have my face in more videos, more articles about the sad old man who can't take a joke? No, I'm letting it go." Mike's frustration was palpable, the protective instinct of someone who'd known Daniel since they were apprentices together, learning their trades side by side. "You're better than letting this slide." "I'm tired, Mike. I'm 52 years old and tired. Fighting doesn't change anything except make me more tired." The words hung between them, heavier than Daniel intended. Mike pulled off his safety glasses, wiped them on his shirt. "There's more. You've got that look." Daniel retrieved Victoria's business card from his wallet, handed it over. Mike studied it, his eyebrows rising. "Steel Core, the CEO showed up at your disaster date. She was there, recognized me from a job I did. Offered me consulting work. $150 an hour." Mike whistled low. "That's real money." "It's too much money. There's got to be a catch. Or maybe you're just that good at what you do and you've been undervaluing yourself for 20 years. The possibility hadn't occurred to Daniel with any seriousness. He knew he was competent, thorough, reliable. Those were table stakes. Everyone in their trade had to be those things to stay employed. But exceptional worth 3 times the going rate, that felt like overreach. "She probably felt sorry for me." Mike's expression hardened. "Listen to yourself. A CEO of a Fortune 500 company doesn't hand out consulting contracts because she feels sorry for someone. She does it because she sees value. The question is why you don't see it." The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Daniel had spent 5 years since Sarah's death operating in survival mode. Keep the lights on. Keep Jake in school. Keep moving forward because stopping meant facing the emptiness. Somewhere in that grind, he'd stopped thinking about what he was worth and started thinking only about what he needed to get bimfe. "What do I tell her, Trey?" You call her Monday morning and you say yes. Then you do the job so well she realizes $150 an hour is a bargain. Daniel left for the Morrison site with Mike's words circling his thoughts. The job was a straightforward residential service upgrade, replacing an old 100-amp panel with a 200-amp system to handle the solar panels and electric vehicle charger the homeowners wanted. He worked alongside 2 other electricians from different companies, the 3 of them coordinating the install with minimal conversation. The physical work was meditative muscle memory taking over while his mind churned elsewhere. By noon, they'd finished roughing in the new panel and conduit runs. Daniel was coiling excess wire when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Victoria's voice came through clear and direct. "Mr. Carter, I'm calling to apologize. Last night was inappropriate. I shouldn't have inserted myself into your evening, and I certainly shouldn't have ambushed you with a business proposition while you were processing a difficult situation. If you'd prefer to forget the whole thing, I understand completely." The apology caught Daniel off guard. He'd expected a follow-up about the job, maybe pressure to decide quickly. Not this. "You don't need to apologize. You were kind when you didn't have to be. Kindness and professional boundaries aren't mutually exclusive. I should have waited, sent a formal email through proper channels. Instead, I acted impulsively, which isn't like me." Daniel leaned against his truck, watching traffic move past on the street below. The job offer. Was it real? A pause, brief but noticeable. Completely real. In fact, I've already drafted the consulting agreement. But I'll only send it if you're genuinely interested, not because you feel obligated after last night. I'm interested, but I need to understand what you actually need. Your engineers didn't solve the Denver plant problem. Why would they listen to me? Victoria's response carried an edge that hadn't been there before. They'll listen because I'll make it clear their performance reviews depend on collaboration. But to answer your real question, most of our engineers are brilliant theoretically and useless practically. They can design a system that looks perfect on paper and fails immediately in real-world conditions. You've spent 25 years dealing with real-world conditions. That perspective is worth more than another graduate degree. The bluntness was refreshing. No corporate speak, no padding, the truth. When would this start? Monday if you're available. Denver plant first. 2 days of comprehensive assessment. I want you to look at everything, not just the electrical systems. Lighting, HVAC controls, emergency backup, the whole infrastructure. Write me a report with prioritized recommendations. Then we'll discuss next steps. I have a job. I can't just walk away from commitments. I'm not asking you to. This is part-time flexible schedule. You work when you can, bill for actual hours. No pressure, no deadlines beyond reasonable timelines. If you need to finish a residential job on a Saturday, the plant assessment waits until Monday. Daniel did quick math. 2 days at $150 per hour, 8 hours each day, came to $2,400. More than he typically made in 2 weeks for work that was essentially his normal job with better pay and more autonomy. I'll do it. Send the agreement. Check your email in an hour. Welcome to Steel Corps, Mr. Carter. The call ended and Daniel stood in the October sunlight, his truck casting shadows across the driveway and trying to process what he'd just committed to. A year ago, even 6 months ago, he would have declined. Too risky, too uncertain. But something about last night, about sitting in that restaurant booth while strangers mocked him, had burned through his usual caution. He was tired of playing safe, tired of making himself smaller to avoid disappointment. The consulting agreement arrived exactly 1 hour later, 12 pages of legal language that Daniel read 3 times before signing electronically. Standard terms, clear deliverables, a confidentiality clause that made sense given the proprietary nature of industrial facilities. He countersigned it, sent it back, and felt the future tilt slightly in a direction he couldn't yet see clearly. Jake came home Sunday evening, his Jeep loaded with laundry and textbooks. They ordered pizza, settled into their usual spots on the couch, and watched a Broncos game with half attention. During commercials, Jake kept glancing at his father, clearly working up to something. "Dad, I need to talk to you about school." The tone triggered immediate concern. Daniel muted the television. "What's wrong? Grades, money." "Nothing's wrong exactly. It's just, I've been thinking a lot about what I'm doing, why I'm doing it." Daniel's stomach tightened. He knew this tone, this preamble. Sarah had used it when she needed to deliver news that would require adjustment. "I'm dropping out." The words landed like a physical blow. Daniel's first instinct was anger, but he forced himself to breathe through it. "You're a sophomore. You're halfway through." "I'm halfway through something I don't want to finish. Dad, I hate it. I hate the classes, the busy work, the feeling that I'm just checking boxes to get a piece of paper that doesn't mean anything. It means you have a degree. It means opportunities." Jake's frustration was palpable, his hands gesturing as he spoke. "Opportunities for what?" "To sit in an office, to do work that feels pointless. I don't want that. I want to do something real. Something I can see and touch and know I did it well." "Like what?" The hesitation before Jake answered told Daniel he wasn't going to like what came next. "Like what you do. I want to learn a trade. Specifically, I want to go to trade school for electrical work." The room seemed to contract. Daniel stared at his son, at the earnest expression, at the determination in eyes that were Sarah's eyes, and felt something break inside his chest. "No, Dad. Absolutely not. I have spent 25 years breaking my back, ruining my knees, working in heat and cold and dangerous conditions so you wouldn't have to. I have saved every spare dollar to give you a chance at something better. And you want to throw it away to do exactly what I've been trying to save you from. Jake's jaw set in that stubborn way that meant he'd thought this through and wouldn't be easily swayed. You talk about your work like it's a punishment, like I'd be sentencing myself to suffering. But when you come home from a job you're satisfied, I've watched you. You have bad days, sure, but you know what you did mattered. I don't have that. I write papers about theories I don't care about for professors who barely read them. That's the punishment. Daniel stood paced to the window, his mind racing through counter-arguments. You're 19. You don't know what 30 years of this work does to your body. You don't know what it's like to be 52 and have people look at you like you're disposable. I know what it's like to watch my father be the most respected tradesman in his field. I know other electricians call you when they can't figure something out. I know the people you work for trust you completely. That's not disposable, Dad. That's honorable. The word hung in the air. Honorable. Daniel had never thought of his work in those terms. It was work. It was necessary. It paid bills. But honorable, that suggested a dignity he'd never assigned to crawling through attics or rewiring basements. I did this so you could have choices, so you could be something more. Jake's voice softened, but the conviction remained. More than what? More than you. You're my hero. Not because of what you earned or where you live, because of how you do your work. The integrity, the skill, the way you solve problems. That's what I want to be. Why is that so hard to accept? Because if your life is valuable, mine should have been too. Because if this work is honorable, I wasted 25 years thinking I wasn't enough. The thoughts formed, but Daniel couldn't voice them. Instead, he turned back to his son. We're not deciding this tonight. You're finishing the semester. Then we'll talk. I've already withdrawn. The deadline was Friday. I'm done, Dad. The betrayal of that sliced deep. Jake had made the decision, acted on it, presented it as fait accompli. Daniel felt control slipping away, felt the careful structure he'd built fracturing. Then you're on your own. You want to make adult decisions, you deal with adult consequences. I'm not paying for trade school. I'm not supporting this. The instant the words left his mouth, Daniel wanted them back. But Jake was already standing grabbing his keys. Fine, I'll figure it out myself. The door slammed. The Jeep started. Daniel stood in his living room, breathing hard, his chest tight with emotions he couldn't name. Pride, fear, anger, something else underneath that felt like grief. His phone rang. Victoria's number. Mr. Carter, I'm sorry to call on a Sunday evening. I wanted to give you a heads up before tomorrow. I'll be at the Denver plant during your assessment. Not to supervise, just to observe. Some of my engineers have expressed skepticism about bringing in outside consultation. I want to make it clear this has my full support. Daniel's mind was still on Jake, still replaying the argument, but he forced himself to focus. Skepticism meaning they don't think I'm qualified. Skepticism meaning they're threatened. You don't have the degrees they have, which makes them uncomfortable when I suggest you might know more than they do. I need you to prove me right tomorrow. Show them what practical expertise looks like. The timing was almost cosmically perverse. His son had just declared he wanted to do exactly what Daniel did while Daniel was walking into a room full of people who thought what he did wasn't good enough. I'll be there at 8. Good. And Mr. Carter, thank you for taking this seriously. I don't hand out consulting contracts lightly. Monday morning, Daniel arrived at the Steel Core Denver facility wearing his newest work clothes, Carhartt pants without stains, a company polo that didn't have any holes, and his good boots. The plant manager, Rodriguez, met him at the front entrance with a visitor badge and a tablet loaded with facility blueprints. CEO's been talking about you since you fixed our voltage issue. The engineers are less enthusiastic. So I heard. Rodriguez walked him through the facility, a sprawling complex of manufacturing equipment, conveyor systems, and industrial machinery that processed raw steel into components for construction and manufacturing. The air smelled of mesh and machine oil, the constant hum of three-phase motors providing background noise. Daniel's eyes automatically cataloged what he saw. Conduit runs, junction boxes, lighting fixtures, emergency exit signs, the telltale indicators of an electrical system's health. They entered a conference room where 5 people waited. 3 men, 2 women, all younger than Daniel by at least a decade. Their dress was business casual, their posture professional, their expressions ranging from polite to openly skeptical. Victoria sat at the head of the table, her presence commanding without effort. Everyone, this is Daniel Carter. He'll be conducting our electrical infrastructure assessment. Daniel, my engineering team. The introductions were perfunctory. Names Daniel knew he'd forget immediately, titles that meant nothing to him. The youngest, a man named Connor, who couldn't be more than 30, spoke first. With respect, Miss Sterling, we've already done comprehensive assessments. Our last audit was 6 months ago. Everything passed inspection. Victoria's expression didn't change. And yet we've had 3 unplanned shutdowns in 4 months, costing us roughly $700,000 in lost production. So either the assessments missed something or the inspections were inadequate. Mr. Carter is here to tell us which. Daniel felt the weight of their attention shift to him. This was his moment to establish credibility or confirm their doubts. He pulled out his own tablet, opened the facility diagrams Rodriguez had provided, and began walking through what he'd observed in just the 15 minutes from the entrance to this room. Your main distribution panel is 30 years old. Not necessarily a problem, but it's rated for a load that's probably 20% below what you're currently pulling during peak production. I saw evidence of heat discoloration on the bus bars, which means you're regularly exceeding capacity. Connor interrupted. That panel was assessed last year. It meets code. Meeting code is baseline. Code is the minimum standard to avoid getting shut down, not the optimal standard for reliable operation. You're meeting code right now, but you're also losing production because you're operating at the edge of your system's capability. One of the women, an engineer named Patricia, leaned forward. What evidence are you basing this on? Heat discoloration isn't visible without opening the panel. Daniel pulled up photos on his tablet. He'd taken them during his voltage regulation work 2 months ago, documenting everything he'd observed. I documented the main panel during my previous visit. These photos show the bus bar condition. You can see the oxidation patterns, the slight warping on the neutral bar. These are indicators of consistent thermal stress. The room went quiet. Connor looked at the photos, then at Victoria, his expression caught between defensiveness and concern. We should have caught that. You should have looked for it. There's a difference between running a checklist and actually investigating the system. Daniel spent the next 2 hours presenting a preliminary assessment based entirely on what he'd seen from the outside lighting that was inefficient and irregular, suggesting piecemeal upgrades without comprehensive planning. Emergency egress lighting that appeared functional, but likely had battery backup systems that hadn't been tested properly. HVAC controls that seemed to run equipment at full capacity even during low demand periods. Victoria watched without interrupting, her attention absolute. When Daniel finished, she thanked everyone and dismissed the engineering team. They filed out their body language, a mix of chastened and irritated. Connor lingered at the door. Mr. Carter, I didn't mean to dismiss your expertise. I'm just trying to protect the company's resources. Protecting resources means finding problems before they cause shutdowns, not after. Connor nodded and left. Victoria stood, gestured for Daniel to follow her to the facility floor. They walked through the manufacturing area, safety glasses on ear protection hanging around their necks for when they got near the louder equipment. Victoria stopped at a control panel for one of the main conveyor systems. Tell me what you see. Daniel examined the panel, opened the cover with permission from the operator, studied the wiring and connections inside. This system was retrofitted. Someone upgraded the motor but didn't upgrade the control circuits. You're running a 15 horsepower motor on control, wiring size for 10 horsepower. It works, but it's operating at higher temperatures than designed. Eventually the insulation breaks down and you get a failure. Could be next month, could be next year, but it's coming. Can you fix it? I can tell you how to fix it. Whether your engineers actually do it is up to them. Victoria's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. I'll make sure they do. Walk with me. They exited the manufacturing floor into a quieter corridor that led to the administrative offices. Victoria stopped at a window overlooking the facility. My father built this company. Started with one small plant, worked 18-hour days, nearly bankrupted himself twice. When he handed it to me 15 years ago, we had 2 facilities and $40 million in revenue. Now we have 6 facilities and $400 million. I've spent my entire career proving I deserve the inheritance. The vulnerability in her voice was unexpected. Daniel stayed quiet, sensing she needed to say whatever came next without interruption. 3 years ago, my husband filed for divorce, cited irreconcilable differences, which in legal terms meant I was married to this company more than I was married to him. He got custody of our daughter because I couldn't prove I'd have time to actually parent. He was right to ask for it. I was working 70 hours a week, traveling constantly, treating my family like a secondary obligation. She turned from the window to face Daniel directly. Sophia is 16 now. She lives in Boulder with her father and his new wife. I see her twice a month if schedules align, which they rarely do. Last week, she sent me an email saying she had a science fair project and asking if I'd come. I looked at my calendar and it was full. I told her I'd try. She wrote back saying not to bother, she was used to it. The pain in Victoria's expression was carefully controlled, but unmistakable. I tell you this because I want you to understand something. I recognize competence because I've had to demonstrate it constantly. I recognize dedication because I've lived it to my own detriment. And I recognize when someone has sacrificed their own advancement for someone they love. Your son's college education, your willingness to live modestly so he could have opportunities, that's obvious from everything I observed Friday night. He wants to quit. The words came out before Daniel could stop them. Victoria's attention sharpened. College. He wants to go to trade school, wants to be an electrician. He told me last night. Actually, he already withdrew, made the decision without telling me. And you're upset because you wanted better for him. I wanted him to have choices, to not be limited by what his body could do or how long his knees would last. Victoria was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. Dignity isn't in your title. It's in how well you do your work. Your son watched you his whole life. He knows that lesson better than any classroom could teach him. The words settled into Daniel's chest, a weight and a relief simultaneously. He'd spent 25 years thinking his work was what you did when you didn't have better options. Jake saw something else entirely. Maybe both perspectives were true. Maybe the gap between them was where the real answer lived. I told him he was on his own, that I wouldn't support it. Will you stand by that? Daniel thought about Sarah, about how she'd approach them. She would have listened longer, asked more questions, looked for the truth beneath Jake's words. She wouldn't have reacted from fear. No, I was angry. I was wrong. Then tell him that. Men who can admit they're wrong are rarer than you'd think. They walked back toward the entrance in silence. At the door, Victoria handed Daniel a folder. Your assignment for the next 2 days. Document everything. Prioritize issues by risk level. Give me recommendations with cost estimates. If you need vendor quotes for equipment, Rodriguez can help. I want honesty, not optimism. You'll get both. Victoria extended her hand and Daniel shook it, the gesture formal, but carrying more weight than a simple business farewell. My daughter's science fair is Thursday evening. She doesn't expect me to come. I'm going anyway. Sometimes the most important work we do isn't in a facility or a boardroom. Daniel drove home with those words circling his mind. The assessment work would consume the next 2 days, but first he needed to call Jake, to apologize, to admit that his reaction came from fear rather than wisdom, to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, his son's choice wasn't a rejection of opportunity, but a recognition of value. The apartment was empty when he arrived. Jake's room looked the same, but Daniel knew his son well enough to recognize the absence. Jake had probably gone back to his dorm to pack to make the separation clean and final. Daniel sat on the couch, pulled out his phone, and called. Jake answered on the 4th ring, his voice wary. Yeah, I was wrong. What I said, how I said it, all of it. I was wrong. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Daniel thought Jake might have hung up. Then his son's voice came through, thick with emotion. You really mean that? I spent 25 years thinking my work only mattered because it paid bills. You spent 19 years watching me and seeing something I couldn't see. Maybe you're right. Maybe there's honor and skill in doing something well because it needs to be done well. If that's what you want to learn, I'll teach you. But you're doing it properly. Trade school, first apprenticeship under someone who isn't your father, and if you decide to work with me, eventually you earn it. Jake's breath hitched. I'm sorry I didn't tell you before withdrawing. I was scared you'd talk me out of it. I probably would have tried, which would have been wrong for all the same reasons I told you it was wrong last night. Come home this weekend. We'll figure out the logistics together. The call ended and Daniel sat in the gathering darkness, his apartment quiet except for the ambient noise of other residents living their lives through thin walls. He thought about Victoria's daughter, about the space between intention and action, about how easy it was to sacrifice the things that mattered for the things that seemed urgent. Tuesday morning, Daniel returned to the steel core plant with a plan. He'd stay until Thursday, give himself 2 full days for comprehensive assessment rather than rushing through in the minimum time. Rodriguez had arranged access to every system, every panel, every piece of infrastructure that touched on electrical or related systems. The work was methodical, almost meditative. Trace circuits, test connections, document conditions, calculate loads, identify inefficiencies. Daniel fell into the rhythm of it, his mind engaging with problems that had clear parameters and knowable solutions. This was what he was good at. Finding the flaw, understanding the system, recommending the fix. By Wednesday afternoon, he'd filled 70 pages of notes and taken 300 photos. The issues ranged from minor inefficiencies to significant safety concerns. The main distribution panel wasn't just undersized, it was showing signs of imminent failure that could cause a catastrophic shutdown or worse, a fire. The emergency lighting system had battery backups that hadn't been replaced in a decade. Half the facility's lighting was outdated technology running at 60% efficiency. Connor found Daniel in one of the storage areas examining a sub-panel that fed power to the loading dock. Rodriguez said, "You've been here since 6 this morning. You finding problems? Nothing that can't be fixed, but it'll take budget and time." Connor leaned against the support beam, his earlier defensiveness gone. "I owe you an apology. My assessment last year was surface level. I ran down a checklist, confirmed everything met code, and called it done. You're showing me what thorough actually looks like. You're young, you'll learn. I have a master's degree in electrical engineering from MIT. I thought that qualified me." Daniel closed the sub-panel, made a note on his tablet. "It qualifies you to understand theory. Experience qualifies you to apply it. They're both valuable. Neither is complete without the other. You think I'm wasting my time with the degree? I think degree to open doors. But what you do once you're through the door, that's about skill and judgment. Your degree got you this job. Your performance keeps it. Right now, you're learning the second part." Connor processed this, then gestured at the sub-panel. "What's wrong with this one?" Daniel spent 20 minutes explaining the issue, showing Connor how to recognize the signs of thermal stress, how to calculate if a panel was appropriately sized for its load, how to think beyond the immediate function to the long-term reliability. Connor asked good questions, took notes on his own tablet, demonstrated that his education had given him the foundation to understand what Daniel was teaching. When they finished, Connor extended his hand. "If I ever run my own company, I want someone like you on my team. You've got someone like me right here. You just need to learn to value what he knows." That evening, Daniel sat in his truck in the steel core parking lot, organizing his notes into a coherent report. The work had been satisfying in a way regular jobs rarely were. No pressure to finish fast, no client looking over his shoulder worried about budget, just pure problem solving. The consulting arrangement Victoria had offered was starting to make sense. She wanted this level of analysis at all 6 facilities. 6 months of part-time work at $150 an hour. The math came to more money than Daniel had made in the best year of his career. His phone buzzed. "Victoria, how's the assessment going?" "I'll have the report ready by tomorrow afternoon. It's thorough. You're not going to like some of what's in it." "I'd be disappointed if I did. If everything was fine, I wouldn't need you. Are you available Thursday morning? I want to walk through your findings with my executive team." "I can be there. 9 a.m. conference room 3. Bring your report and your honesty. This group needs both." Thursday morning arrived cold and gray November, making its presence felt. Daniel dressed in the same professional casual he'd worn Monday, minus the work grime. He arrived at the Steel Core corporate office building 20 minutes early, used the time to review his report one final time, checking for errors or unclear explanations. The conference room held 12 people when Daniel entered. Victoria sat at the head of the table, flanked by men and women in business attire that screamed executive leadership. Connor was there along with Patricia and 2 other engineers from the Denver plant. Everyone else was unfamiliar. Victoria made introductions, CFO, CO, VP of operations, heads of various departments. Daniel only half listened to. Then she turned the floor over to him. Mr. Carter has completed his preliminary assessment of our Denver facility. He's going to present his findings. I expect everyone to listen carefully because this information is going to drive some significant budget decisions. Daniel connected his tablet to the room's display system and began. He walked them through the major findings using photos and diagrams to illustrate each point. The main distribution panel that needed immediate replacement. The emergency lighting system that was a liability. The HVAC controls that were running inefficiently, costing thousands monthly in unnecessary energy consumption. The retrofitted equipment operating outside safe parameters. He presented cost estimates for each fix prioritized by risk level. The main panel, $40,000 and 3 days of downtime. The lighting upgrades, $60,000 across the facility, could be done in phases. The HVAC improvements, $25,000 plus ongoing programming costs. The CFO, a severe woman named Margaret, spoke first. You're recommending we spend over $100,000 on issues that haven't caused any actual problems yet. They haven't caused problems you've noticed, the 3 shutdowns in the past 4 months. Those were symptoms. The main panel failure during the September shutdown. That was your system telling you it's overloaded. You can spend $100,000 now on planned maintenance, or you can wait until something fails catastrophically and spend 3 times that on emergency repairs plus lost production. The VP of operations, a man named Harrison, jumped in. Our insurance would cover catastrophic failure. Your insurance would cover property damage. It won't cover lost production, missed deadlines, or customer relationships damaged by your inability to deliver. And your premiums would increase based on preventable failures. Victoria let the conversation continue, her executives raising objections, while Daniel calmly addressed each one. He'd expected resistance. Money people always resisted spending on prevention because prevention didn't show up on quarterly reports as dramatic improvements. It just kept things from getting worse. Connor spoke up, surprising everyone. Mr. Carter is right. I reviewed his assessment methodology. It's more thorough than anything we've done internally. These aren't theoretical problems. They're real issues that will cause real failures. The only question is when, not if. Patricia nodded agreement. The energy waste alone justifies the HVAC investment. We'd recoup that $25,000 in reduced operating costs within 2 years. The room's energy shifted. Victoria seized the moment. I'm approving the full budget. Margaret, find the money. Harrison, coordinate the work schedule to minimize production impact. Connor, you're the point person on implementation. Mr. Carter will consult throughout the process. Any objections? Silence. The executives exchanged glances, but no one spoke up against the CEO's decision. The meeting adjourned and people filed out, conversations fragmenting into smaller groups. Daniel was packing his tablet when Victoria approached. That went better than I expected. Usually they fight me harder on capital expenditures. You stacked the deck. Having your engineers support my findings took away their main argument. I didn't tell Connor or Patricia to support you. They did that on their own because you convinced them. That's the difference between authority and expertise. I have one. You earned the other. Daniel considered the distinction, recognizing its truth. The science fair is tonight, right? Victoria's expression shifted, vulnerability breaking through her professional veneer. 6 p.m. in Boulder. I blocked my entire afternoon and evening. No meetings, no calls, no excuses. She'll remember you showed up. I hope so. I have a lot to make up for. Daniel left the building with a sense of completion that had nothing to do with the paycheck he'd receive. He'd proven something, not to Victoria or her executives, but to himself. His knowledge had value. His experience mattered. The years he'd spent thinking he was just scraping by had actually built something substantial. On the drive home, he called Jake. You available this weekend? Yeah, why? I want to take you to meet some people. Trade school instructors, union representatives, people who can tell you what electrical apprenticeship actually involves. If you're serious about this, you need to understand what you're getting into beyond the romanticized version you've built in your head. Jake's excitement was audible. You're really going to help me? I'm really going to teach you. There's a difference. Help implies I'm making it easier. Teaching means I'm showing you how hard it actually is and expecting you to rise to that standard. I can do that. We'll see. The weekend arrived with unseasonable warmth, Denver's weather demonstrating its usual schizophrenia. Daniel drove Jake to the IBEW Local 68 training facility, where they met with instructors who explained the apprenticeship program. 4 years of combined classroom instruction and paid on-the-job training. Starting wage below minimum for the first year, increasing with demonstrated competency. Physical demands, safety requirements, technical standards. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. It was exactly what Daniel had been doing for 25 years, laid bare without illusion. Jake absorbed it all with focused attention. When they left, he was quiet, processing. Still interested. More than before, that's real. It's not promises about career opportunities or abstract success. It's actual skill development, the clear standards. Daniel felt something in his chest relax. Jake understood, not just the romance of working with your hands, but the reality of it, the commitment, the discipline, the fact that this path was neither superior nor inferior to college, just different. Jake was choosing it with eyes open rather than running from something else. They stopped for lunch at a diner that served portions sized for working men. Jake ordered the burger. Daniel got coffee and pie, his appetite still adjusting after the stress of the presentation. I heard from the science fair, Jake said between bites. Sophia Sterling's project won first place in the regional competition. Daniel looked up from his pie. You know Sophia Sterling? She's in my chemistry study group. Smart as hell, kind of quiet. Why? The world was smaller than Daniel had realized. Victoria's daughter and his son crossing paths in ways neither parent knew about. Her mother is my consulting client, the CEO who hired me. Jake's eyebrows rose. No kidding, Sophia said her mom never comes to anything. But she showed up last night, stayed for the whole thing. Sophia was shocked. Daniel smiled, genuinely pleased. Sometimes people surprise you. They finished lunch and drove back to Denver, the conversation drifting through topics both significant and mundane. Jake would return to campus to officially complete his withdrawal paperwork, then move back home while applying to trade schools. The timeline was uncertain, but the direction was clear. Daniel's phone rang as they pulled into the apartment complex parking lot. Victoria. Mr. Carter, I have a proposal, actually more of a request. Would you be willing to expand your consulting to include our other facilities? Same terms, flexible schedule, but comprehensive assessments at all 6 plants. I need someone I can trust to tell me the truth about our infrastructure, and I haven't found that in my current engineering staff. The offer was exactly what Mike had predicted. Daniel had proven his value. Victoria wanted to leverage it across her entire company. That's a lot of work. 6 to 9 months depending on what you find and how quickly we can implement fixes. But it's the best investment I can make in this company's operational reliability. Are you interested? Daniel looked at Jake, at his son, who was choosing a path because he believed in it and realized that belief was worth more than safety, worth more than staying small to avoid risk. I'm interested. Send me the details. The call ended and Jake grinned. You're doing it, actually building something bigger. We'll see where it goes, but Daniel knew. This was momentum. This was the beginning of something that felt less like survival and more like growth. He'd walked into a restaurant 8 days ago with $57 and a fragile hope that had been shattered. He was walking out of this conversation with a consulting contract worth more than he'd made in any single year of his career. Not because someone had rescued him, because someone had seen what he was worth and decided it was worth investing in. The difference mattered more than Daniel had words to express. The expansion to Steel Corps' other facilities came with geography. Daniel spent December traveling between Denver and 4 other cities: Phoenix, Albuquerque, Kansas City, and Tulsa. Each plant presented variations on the same themes: aging infrastructure, incomplete documentation, Band-Aid fixes layered over fundamental problems. He drove rather than flew his truck, accumulating miles while audiobooks filled the hours between cities. Physics lectures, history, business management, subjects he'd never studied formally, but found himself drawn to now that learning felt like choice rather than requirement. Jake enrolled in the IBEW apprenticeship program starting January. The acceptance came with conditions: maintain technical standards, complete classroom hours, demonstrate proficiency before advancement. No shortcuts, no nepotism. Daniel made clear to the training director that his son would receive no preferential treatment. If anything, hold him to higher standards. Prove that recommendations based on family connections were earned, not gifted. The first month, Jake came home exhausted, his hands blistered from conduit, bending his back sore from crawling through tight spaces. Daniel watched without comment, recognizing the same baptism by discomfort he'd experienced 27 years earlier. You either quit in the first 6 weeks or you develop the calluses, literal and metaphorical, that mark tradesmen. Jake didn't quit. Victoria called Daniel weekly with questions, progress, updates, occasional requests to visit a facility earlier than scheduled because production issues suggested deeper electrical problems. Their conversations evolved from purely transactional to something else. She asked about Jake's training. He asked about Sophia's academics. Professional boundaries blurred without deliberate intent, the way ice melts gradually under sustained warmth. Mid-January, Daniel finished his assessment of the Phoenix facility. The plant manager, a weathered man named Torres who'd worked there 30 years, walked Daniel to his truck. "Sterling's asked about you 3 times this week, checking your progress, wanting updates. In 20 years, I've never seen her micromanage consultant work like this." Daniel loaded his toolbox into the truck bed, buying time to formulate a response that wouldn't reveal the subtle shift happening between them. "Maybe she's just concerned about the budget." Torres laughed, a rough sound full of knowing. "Son, I've been married 42 years. I know what concern looks like, and I know what interest looks like. That woman is interested. Question is whether you're smart enough to notice." The observation lodged in Daniel's mind during the 7-hour drive back to Denver. Was Victoria interested? Their interactions remained professional, bounded by the consultant-client relationship. But there were moments. The way she listened when he talked, fully present, rather than divided between him and her phone. The questions she asked about his life, demonstrating retention of details he'd mentioned weeks earlier. The fact that she'd carved out time to attend Sophia's science fair despite the professional cost. Daniel caught himself thinking about her in ways that had nothing to do with electrical systems, the sharp intelligence behind her eyes, the rare moments when her corporate armor cracked to reveal vulnerability, the way she held herself accountable for past failures without wallowing in guilt. These were not thoughts a consultant should have about a client. These were thoughts that led to complications. He called Mike from the road, needing to voice the confusion to someone who'd known him long enough to cut through nonsense. "So you're catching feelings for a CEO?" "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to. I can hear it in how you're not saying it. What's holding you back?" Daniel watched highway miles unspool through his windshield, the question requiring honesty he wasn't sure he possessed. "She's successful, wealthy, operates in a world I don't understand. What would someone like her want with someone like me?" Mike's sigh carried through the phone's speaker. "You're doing it again. That thing where you decide you're not enough before anyone else gets a chance to make that determination. Maybe she sees value you can't see because you're too close to it. Maybe she's tired of men who measure worth in salary and stock options. Maybe she just likes you for who you are." Novel concept, I know. The possibility felt too fragile to examine directly. Daniel changed the subject, asked about Mike's latest woodworking project, let the conversation drift to safer territory. February brought Denver's heaviest snowfall in a decade. Daniel was scheduled to visit the Kansas City facility, but found himself stranded, I-70 closed due to whiteout conditions. He called Victoria to explain the delay. "Where are you right now?" "Coffee shop in Lyman, waiting for the roads to clear." "That could be hours. Come back to Denver. We'll push Kansas City to next week." The drive back took 3 times longer than normal, his truck crawling through snow that erased lane markers and turned familiar highways into guesswork. By the time Daniel reached the city, evening had settled and his hands ached from gripping the steering wheel. His phone buzzed as he pulled into his parking lot. "Have you eaten?" Victoria's text felt simultaneously expected and surprising. He typed back one-handed. "Not since breakfast. There's a bistro on 17th, Marcos. Meet me there in an hour." It wasn't phrased as invitation or request, just statement of plan. Daniel sat in his truck, engine running for heat, debating. This crossed a line. Dinner at Romano's had been circumstance. This was deliberate. But his stomach was empty and his apartment was cold, and the thought of Victoria's company appealed more than it should. He showered, changed into jeans and a sweater, arrived at Marco's 15 minutes early. The restaurant was intimate, maybe 20 tables, soft lighting that suggested dates rather than business dinners. Victoria sat in a corner booth, reading something on her tablet, a glass of red wine at her elbow. She looked up when Daniel approached, and her expression shifted in a way he couldn't quite interpret. "You look frozen." "It's February in Colorado." "Sit. Warm up." I ordered soup. The soup arrived moments later, French onion with Gruyere, thick enough to require a knife. Daniel ate without pretense, hunger overriding self-consciousness. Victoria watched with what might have been amusement. "When did you last eat properly?" "Define properly." "Anything beyond gas station coffee and protein bars." Daniel paused, reviewing the past week. Phoenix had been long days with vending machine lunches. The drive back had included fast food consumed while driving. Proper meals required time he hadn't prioritized. "I eat fine." "You eat functionally. There's a difference." The observation felt too intimate, suggesting she'd noticed patterns about his life beyond their professional interaction. Daniel set down his spoon, met her gaze directly. "Why am I here, Victoria? This isn't a business dinner." Her composure held steady, but something in her posture acknowledged the directness. "No, it's not. I wanted to see you, away from facilities and reports and the performance we both maintain when other people are watching." "Is that allowed?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither had voiced until now. Daniel felt the ground shifting beneath their careful professional distance. "I don't know what this is." "Neither do I, but I know I think about you when I shouldn't. I know I look forward to your calls more than makes sense for a consulting relationship. I know that when Torres mentioned you were finishing Phoenix ahead of schedule, I was disappointed rather than pleased because it meant less reason to talk to you." The admission was delivered with Victoria's characteristic directness, no hedging or softening. Daniel appreciated the honesty even as it complicated everything. "You're my client. I work for you. You work for Steel Corps. I'm your point of contact, but the relationship is between you and the company. If that distinction matters." "It might." "Or we could acknowledge that we're both adults capable of navigating complexity. I'm not asking for promises or commitments. I'm asking if you'd be interested in exploring whether this connection we've developed professionally might extend beyond that context." Daniel thought about Sarah, about the years they built together, about the grief that still surfaced unexpectedly when something triggered memory. Moving forward felt like betrayal even 5 years later. But staying frozen in the past was its own betrayal. Sarah would have wanted him to live, not just survive. "I'm interested, but I don't know how to do this anymore." Dating was different 25 years ago. Victoria's expression softened, the corporate armor cracking further. "I got divorced 3 years ago after 20 years of marriage. I have no idea what I'm doing either. Maybe we figure it out together." They stayed at Marco's for 3 hours. The conversation ranged across territory, both safe and vulnerable. Victoria talked about the pressure of inheriting her father's company, the constant need to prove she deserved the position rather than just inherited it, the sacrifices that had cost her marriage and nearly cost her relationship with Sophia. The dawning recognition that success defined by others' standards was hollow when it came at the expense of personal connection. Daniel shared his own navigation of grief, the early years of single parenthood, when he barely kept functioning, the slow rebuilding of identity beyond husband and father. The realization that he'd been defining himself by what he provided rather than who he was. Jake's decision to pursue electrical work had forced confrontation with that distortion. "He sees honor in what you do. That must be validating." "It's confusing. I spent his entire life trying to ensure he'd have options I didn't have. Now he's choosing the same path, and I don't know if that makes me proud or makes me a failure for not showing him there were alternatives. Maybe it makes you a success for demonstrating that craftsmanship and integrity matter more than credentials. Maybe he's not choosing your limitations. Maybe he's choosing your values." The reframing shifted something in Daniel's understanding. He'd been viewing Jake's choice through the lens of his own insecurity rather than his son's agency. Jake wasn't repeating Daniel's life. He was building his own version, informed by what he'd observed, but not constrained by it. They left Marco's near closing the snow, still falling, but gentler now accumulation measured in inches rather than feet. Victoria's car was parked 3 blocks away. Daniel walked with her, their breath visible in the cold air, shoulders occasionally bumping in a way that felt both accidental and intentional. At her car, Victoria turned to face him. I have a board meeting next week. They'll want updates on the infrastructure assessments, cost projections, timeline for implementation. Your work has been excellent, but it's also expensive. Some of them will push back on continuing the consulting arrangement. Are you warning me to prepare for termination? I'm warning you that corporate politics are complicated. My relationship with the board has been strained since the divorce. They see me as competent but compromised. A CEO who couldn't maintain her own marriage gets questioned on every major decision. If they discover I'm spending time with a consultant, it provides ammunition. Daniel understood the subtext. Whatever was developing between them came with professional risk for Victoria. She was choosing to pursue it anyway, but he needed to understand the stakes. We could keep this professional. We could, but I don't want to. I've spent 3 years being careful, being appropriate, managing perceptions. I'm tired of letting other people's judgments constrain my choices. If that makes me reckless, so be it. She kissed him, then brief and deliberate, before sliding into her car and driving away. Daniel stood in the falling snow, his mind racing to process the evening's evolution from professional courtesy to something unmistakably personal. The board meeting happened the following Thursday. Victoria called Daniel 2 hours before it started. They're going to question the consulting costs. $70,000 between Denver and Phoenix, with 4 facilities remaining. I need you prepared to present the value proposition if they request your presence. They want to meet me. Richard Brennan does. He's our largest non-family shareholder and the most vocal about operational efficiency. If he's satisfied with your work, the others will follow his lead. Daniel cleared his afternoon schedule and drove to SteelCore's corporate headquarters, a glass tower in the Denver Tech Center that projected exactly the kind of corporate success Victoria had built. The security desk issued him a visitor badge and directed him to the 14th floor. The boardroom occupied a corner with views across the city toward the mountains. 12 people sat around a table sized for 20, their attention focused on Victoria standing at the room's front with a presentation displayed behind her. She noticed Daniel's entrance, nodded slightly, and continued her remarks. Infrastructure investment provides returns that compound over time. The Denver facility alone has seen 20% reduction in unplanned downtime since implementing Mr. Carter's recommendations. Phoenix is tracking similar improvements. The cost of these assessments and repairs is significant upfront, but the prevention of catastrophic failures justifies the expenditure. A man in his 60s, silver-haired and commanding, spoke without raising his hand. Ms. Sterling, no one questions the value of infrastructure maintenance. What we question is whether external consulting at premium rates is necessary when we employ an engineering staff specifically tasked with these responsibilities. Victoria's expression remained neutral, but Daniel sensed the tension beneath her composure. Our engineering staff excels at design and implementation. They're less effective at forensic assessment. Mr. Carter brings 25 years of field experience that complements rather than replaces our internal capabilities. At $150 per hour, which is less than we'd pay for any other master-level electrical consultant with comparable experience. I've checked market rates. He's actually undercharging. Brennan leaned forward, his attention shifting to Daniel. Mr. Carter, walk us through your methodology. How do you assess a facility? Daniel had prepared for technical questions, but not for this. He moved to the front of the room and accepting the implicit invitation to present himself for evaluation. 12 pairs of eyes tracked his movement. I start by reviewing existing documentation to understand what should be present. Then I walk every square foot of the facility, looking for discrepancies between documentation and reality. Industrial plants evolve over time. Equipment gets added, systems get modified, quick fixes become permanent. These changes often don't get properly documented. The gap between what's on paper and what exists is where problems hide. Couldn't our engineers do this? They could, but they're optimized for forward-looking work, design, implementation, innovation. I'm optimized for diagnosis. It's a different skill set. Both matter. Brennan studied Daniel with the calculating attention of someone accustomed to identifying weakness and exploiting it. You're 52 years old with no formal engineering degree. What makes you qualified to audit facilities designed by MIT graduates? The question was designed to provoke defensive response. Davey. Daniel recognized the technique and refused the bait. My qualification is 25 years of fixing what MIT graduates designed incorrectly. Theory is beautiful. Reality is messy. I understand mess. A woman 3 seats down from Brennan smiled slightly. Victoria remained expressionless, but Daniel sensed her approval. You found problems at 2 facilities. Should we assume problems at the remaining 4? You should assume every facility has problems. Buildings age, systems degrade. The question isn't whether issues exist. It's whether you find them proactively or wait until they find you. Brennan's expression didn't change, but he leaned back in his chair, the aggressive posture easing slightly. What's your assessment timeline for the remaining facilities? 3 weeks each. Kansas City, Tulsa, Albuquerque, and Sacramento. 12 weeks total if I'm working without interruption. And your total projected cost for all 6 facilities, Daniel had run these numbers repeatedly knowing they'd be questioned, including implementation of recommended repairs, approximately $400,000. The assessments themselves are roughly $120,000. The repairs are the majority cost. The room went quiet. $400,000 was substantial, but not catastrophic for a company steel core's size. Brennan looked at Victoria. That's within operational budget variance. I don't see justification for board-level scrutiny. If the Denver and Phoenix results hold across other facilities, this is good value. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes, but the crucial question had been answered. Daniel was dismissed with thanks, told to continue his work. Victoria followed him out, her heels clicking against marble floors until they reached the elevator bank. That went better than expected. Brennan seemed satisfied. Brennan is never satisfied, but he respects competence and directness. You provided both. The elevator arrived and they stepped inside alone in the mirrored space. Victoria pressed the button for the ground floor, then turned to face Daniel. There's a fundraiser Saturday night. Children's Hospital Gala. I have a table that's half empty because most of my regular attendees found excuses to decline. Would you consider filling one of those seats? The request was both professional courtesy and something more. Daniel recognized the multiple layers of opportunity to demonstrate he could navigate her world test of whether he was comfortable in contexts far removed from job sites and tool belts, statement that Victoria was willing to be seen publicly with him in her professional sphere. I don't own formal wear. Men's Warehouse on Colorado Boulevard. Tell them you need a tux for Sterling Industries. They'll have you fitted within the hour. That's not what I meant. I know what you meant. You're worried about fitting in, about being out of place, about giving people reason to judge either you or me. I'm telling you those concerns are irrelevant. If you want to come, come, because you're interested in spending the evening together in a different context. If you don't want to come, that's also fine. But don't decline because you think you don't belong. You belong anywhere you choose to be. The elevator doors opened on the ground floor. Victoria stepped out, paused, looked back. Saturday, 7 p.m. Brown Palace Hotel. Let me know by Friday. Daniel spent 2 days considering the invitation. The rational part of his mind cataloged every reason to decline. Different worlds, different backgrounds. The complication of mixing personal and professional relationships. The board's potential reaction if they discovered he was dating the CEO. The risk to Victoria's position if this went badly. But beneath the rational objections lived something else. Curiosity, interest, the unfamiliar sensation of wanting something beyond survival and obligation. He'd spent 5 years being careful, being appropriate, prioritizing Jake's needs and his own stability. Victoria represented possibility, the chance that maybe there was more to life than the careful routines he'd constructed. Friday morning, he texted his decision. I'll be there. Men's Warehouse had his measurements within 15 minutes, promised the tux would be ready Saturday afternoon. Daniel tried on the jacket, saw himself in the 3-way mirror, and barely recognized the figure looking back. The last time he'd worn formal wear was his wedding. This felt simultaneously like honoring that memory and betraying it. Jake found him Saturday evening struggling with a bow tie in their apartment's cramped bathroom. You look uncomfortable. I am uncomfortable. Then why are you going? Daniel met his son's eyes in the mirror, finding words for something he'd barely articulated to himself. Because I've been comfortable for 5 years. Comfortable is safe, but comfortable is also stuck. Victoria makes me want to try something that isn't safe. Jake grinned, reached over and fixed the bow tie with surprising dexterity. Sophia taught me that last month. She needed a date for her winter formal, and her father refused to help. I drove up to Boulder, tied the bow tie for her boyfriend, and gave him the standard dad speech about respecting daughters. Figured someone should. The casual mention of the connection between their families felt both cosmic coincidence and inevitable. Daniel and Victoria had been circling toward this for months. Their children had already bridged the gap. How is Sophia? Smart, driven, really close with her dad and stepmother, but she mentions missing her mom more than she probably should. I think she's worried about Victoria being alone. Victoria has her company. Companies don't care if you're lonely, Dad. People do. The Brown Palace Hotel occupied a full city block downtown, its architecture Victorian-era opulent, transported to Colorado and sustained through careful maintenance. Daniel walked through the lobby, following signs toward the ballroom where the gala was being held, his discomfort increasing with each step. Crystal chandeliers, marble columns, people in evening wear that cost more than his truck's monthly payment. Victoria stood near the entrance wearing a floor-length dress in deep blue that transformed her from corporate executive to something ethereal. She saw Daniel and her expression shifted, professional mask dissolving into genuine warmth. You clean up well. I feel like an imposter. Everyone here feels like an imposter. They're just better at pretending otherwise. Come meet my table. The evening unfolded in waves. Cocktails and forced conversation with people Daniel had nothing in common with beyond geography. Dinner featuring courses he couldn't name and portions that wouldn't satisfy a working man's appetite. Speeches about the hospital's mission and the importance of community support. Throughout it all, Victoria remained present, but not possessive, introducing Daniel as her consultant and letting others draw their own conclusions. Richard Brennan approached during dessert, his wife at his elbow. Mr. Carter, I didn't expect to see you here. Ms. Sterling invited me. Brennan's expression was unreadable. How's the infrastructure work progressing? They talked business for 10 minutes, Brennan asking detailed questions about Kansas City's scheduled assessment, the timeline for implementing Denver's repairs, whether Daniel had identified any patterns across facilities that might indicate systemic issues. The conversation was professional-focused, demonstrating that Brennan's interest was genuine rather than performative. When Brennan and his wife moved on, Victoria leaned close. He likes you. That's rare. He likes competence. There's a difference. With Brennan, those are the same thing. The ballroom had a terrace overlooking the city. Daniel stepped outside during the auction portion, needing air and distance from the orchestrated cheerfulness inside. Victoria found him 10 minutes later. Overwhelming, different. That's diplomatic. Daniel watched traffic move far below the city, pulsing with Friday night energy that had nothing to do with charity galas and rubber chicken dinners. I don't belong in that room. Neither do I. I learned to fake it because the company required it. But I hate these events. The performative generosity, the social climbing, disguised as philanthropy, the way people measure worth by table placement and auction bids. It's exhausting. Then why come? Because hospitals need funding and children need care, and my privilege comes with responsibility. I can hate the mechanism while supporting the outcome. The honesty cut through Daniel's discomfort. Victoria wasn't asking him to love this world, just to understand she navigated it because she had to, not because she wanted to. Your ex-husband, he was comfortable here. Thomas thrived here. He's a corporate attorney, fourth-generation Denver money. This is his natural habitat. I'm the daughter of a machinist who built a business through sheer determination. I learned the language, but I'm not a native speaker. The revelation reframed everything Daniel had assumed about Victoria's background. Not inherited wealth, but earned success. Not born into this world, but adapted to it. The parallel to his own experience was too obvious to ignore. We're both translators. Exactly. We learned to speak multiple languages because survival required it. That's actually a strength even when it feels like weakness. They stayed on the terrace longer than appropriate, the chill February air preferable to the overheated ballroom. When they finally returned, the auction had ended and people were clustering around the bar, the formal portions of the evening complete. Victoria made polite goodbyes, collected her coat, and they left together. The valet brought her car first. Daniel walked her to it, uncertain how this evening should end. Victoria solved the question by kissing him longer and less carefully than outside Marcos, her hands on his lapels pulling him close. Come to Boulder tomorrow. I'm having lunch with Sophia. I want you to meet her properly. Why? Because you matter. Because this matters. Because I'm tired of keeping parts of my life separate to avoid complication. Sophia knows I've been seeing someone. She wants to know who. Daniel's instinct was to refuse to maintain distance to avoid the commitment implicit in meeting Victoria's daughter. But Jake's words from earlier echoed, companies don't care if you are lonely. People do. What time Sunday lunch happened at a cafe near the University of Colorado campus? Sophia Sterling was 16 going on 30, her intelligence obvious in the way she asked questions and evaluated answers. She looked like Victoria, but moved with a teenager's incomplete confidence, still growing into herself. So you're the consultant my mom won't stop talking about. Daniel glanced at Victoria, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I work on electrical systems. I know what you do. Jake talks about you constantly too. Says his dad is teaching him everything about being a master electrician. I think he worships you. The observation caught Daniel off guard. He and Jake had settled into a functional relationship, but worship seemed excessive. Jake has his own path. Jake chose your path. There's a difference. Sophia's directness was Victoria's temperament filtered through teenage lack of social polish. Daniel appreciated it even as it disarmed him. The meal progressed through comfortable conversation. Sophia talked about her college applications, her debate competitions, her frustration that her father wanted her to pursue pre-law when she was more interested in engineering. Victoria listened with focus Daniel suspected was recent development, making up for years of absence with deliberate presence. Walking back to their cars afterward, Sophia hugged her mother goodbye, then surprised Daniel by hugging him too. Take care of her. She pretends she doesn't need it, but she does. The drive back to Denver gave Daniel 2 hours to process the weekend's rapid evolution. Friday, he had been a consultant with growing personal interest in his client. Sunday, he had met her daughter, been publicly seen with her at a major social event, and crossed definitively into relationship territory that couldn't be walked back without consequence. His phone rang as he merged onto Highway 36. Not Victoria. Richard Brennan. Mr. Carter, I'm calling in an unofficial capacity. Do you have a moment? I'm driving, but go ahead. I attended the gala last night. Saw you with Victoria. I want to be direct. Are you in a personal relationship with our CEO? The question was phrased carefully, avoiding accusation while demanding honesty. Daniel considered lying, decided it would only complicate matters. That's between Victoria and me. Unfortunate, it's also between Victoria and the board. We have a policy against executives engaging in relationships with vendors or consultants. The policy exists to prevent conflicts of interest and perception of impropriety. I'm not a vendor. I'm a consultant on a fixed-term contract. The policy doesn't distinguish. The concern is whether your professional recommendations might be influenced by personal involvement, or whether Victoria's business decisions regarding your contract might be compromised by personal feelings. Daniel's grip on the steering wheel tightened. This was the complication Victoria had warned about arriving faster than either had anticipated. My recommendations are based on technical assessment, nothing else. If Victoria wants to fire me, she can do that regardless of what's happening between us personally. I believe you, but board governance requires we address potential conflicts proactively. I'm not saying stop seeing her. I'm saying be aware that continuing the relationship while under contract creates problems for both of you. The call ended, and Daniel drove the remaining miles processing implications. He could complete the current contract and step away. He could tell Victoria that professional considerations took priority over personal interest. He could do what made sense, what protected her position, what avoided complication. Or he could refuse to let other people's policies determine whether he pursued something that felt more real than anything had felt in 5 years. Monday morning, Daniel was scheduled to start the Kansas City assessment. He called Victoria instead. We need to talk about the board policy. Her silence lasted 3 seconds. Brennan called you. He wanted me aware of the conflict of interest concerns. He was diplomatic, but the message was clear. Us continuing while I'm under contract creates problems. What do you want to do? The question put the decision in his hands, which felt both fair and impossible. Daniel thought about Jake choosing electrical work despite pressure toward college, about Victoria going to Sophia's science fair despite professional cost, about all the times he'd chosen safe over meaningful and wondered later if it had been worth it. I want to finish this contract because the work matters and half-finished assessments help no one. Then we figure out what comes next based on whether this is real or just two lonely people finding comfort. Victoria's exhale was audible. That's fair. But Daniel, this is real. For me, it's real. I need you to know that before you decide whether it's real for you too. The admission settled into Daniel's chest, weighty and consequential. He'd been approaching this carefully, protecting himself from potential loss by maintaining emotional distance. Victoria was doing the opposite, declaring her position without knowing if he'd reciprocate. It was either brave or reckless, and Daniel suspected it was both. I'll call you from Kansas City. The assessment work became more complex with personal implications hovering. Daniel threw himself into the technical challenges, finding temporary refuge in problems that had knowable solutions. Kansas City's facility was older than Denver's, its electrical infrastructure, a patchwork of decades' worth of modifications. He documented everything, filled pages with notes and recommendations, operated with the thoroughness that had made him Victoria's first choice for this work. Connor flew in for 2 days, shadowing Daniel to learn assessment methodology. They worked side by side, Daniel teaching the same way he'd been taught through demonstration and explanation and insistence on precision. Connor proved capable, his MIT education providing framework that Daniel's practical knowledge filled in. You could train engineers to do this work. I could, but companies don't value training the way they value credentials. They'd rather hire someone with an advanced degree than develop someone with field experience. That's short-sighted. That's corporate culture. Credentials are quantifiable. Competence isn't. Connor was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. The board's worried about you and Victoria. Word traveled fast in corporate bush environments. Daniel shouldn't have been surprised. Your opinion on that? My opinion is Victoria has been alone since her divorce and works too much because she doesn't have anything else. If you make her happy and don't compromise her professional judgment, the board's concerns are bullshit disguised as policy. And if I do compromise her judgment, then I'll be the first to tell you you're a problem. But I've watched how she talks about you, how her face changes when your name comes up. This isn't infatuation. This is someone finding something that matters, that's worth protecting. The conversation stayed with Daniel through the rest of Kansas City, through Tulsa's 2-week assessment, through the mounting evidence that every steel core facility had infrastructure issues ranging from minor to severe. He compiled comprehensive reports, prioritized recommendations, provided cost estimates that made Victoria's CFO grimace, but couldn't dispute. By late March, 4 facilities remained complete. Only Albuquerque and Sacramento stood between Daniel and contract completion. He'd been on the road more than home, accumulating hotel nights and highway miles. Jake was progressing through his apprenticeship, proving competent enough that his instructors stopped mentioning his family connection. Victoria and Daniel spoke daily conversations that ranged from technical questions to personal revelations, their connection deepening despite geographic separation. The board meeting happened in early April. Daniel wasn't invited, but Victoria called afterward, her voice tight with controlled anger. They're pushing me to terminate your contract early. Brennan argued that we've identified the major issues and internal engineering can handle implementation. What he really means is they want to remove the complication of our relationship before it becomes public knowledge. Do it. What? Terminate the contract. Sacramento and Albuquerque can wait, or you can send Connor. He's ready. The work doesn't need me anymore. Victoria's breathing was audible through the phone. That's not what I want. What you want and what your board requires aren't the same thing. I won't be the reason you lose your position. This company is your legacy. I'm just someone you met in a restaurant. The words came out harsher than intended, but Daniel meant them. He wouldn't let Victoria sacrifice what she'd built for a relationship that was barely 3 months old and might not survive outside the intensity of its beginning. You're not just anything. You matter to me more than you seem to understand. Then prove it. Tell the board to terminate my contract. Choose your company. I'll still be here when the dust settles. The line went dead. Daniel sat in his Kansas City hotel room, staring at the phone, wondering if he just saved Victoria's career or destroyed whatever chance they had had at something meaningful. His answer came not from Victoria, but from Richard Brennan, calling 2 days later. The contract is being terminated effective immediately. You'll be paid through end of April as severance. Your work was excellent. This isn't about performance. I understand. Do you? Because I'm not sure Victoria does. She fought for you, which was exactly what we were concerned about. Personal feelings influencing business decisions. She's a brilliant CEO, but she's compromised where you're concerned. She made the right choice. Maybe, but she's furious about being forced into it. Whatever happens between you two now, be aware that you cost her something politically. The board has lost some confidence in her judgment. That's a hard thing to rebuild. The call ended, and Daniel felt the weight of unintended consequences. He'd thought removing himself from professional context would simplify things. Instead, he'd created exactly the conflict everyone had been worried about. Victoria's defense of him had confirmed the board's suspicions. His absence would be a permanent reminder of that error. Jake came home that weekend, found Daniel sitting at the kitchen table with cold coffee and stacks of documentation from 6 months of assessment work. You look terrible. Contract got terminated. Jake pulled out a chair, sat down, studied his father with worry. Because of Victoria. Because the board thought our relationship created conflict of interest. They weren't wrong. So what now? Daniel didn't have an answer. The consulting work had been simultaneously successful and catastrophic. He'd proven his value, earned more in 6 months than in any previous 2 years, and established a reputation beyond his usual network. He'd also complicated Victoria's relationship with her board, confirmed their suspicions about her judgment, and created a situation where their personal relationship was now publicly known and professionally scrutinized. Now I go back to regular electrical work, finish what I started, move forward. And Victoria, that's up to her. The answer felt incomplete, even as Daniel said it, but he didn't know how to articulate the tangled emotions beneath the simple words. He'd fallen for Victoria, completely irrevocably in ways he hadn't thought possible after Sarah. But falling for someone from a different world came with complications. The question was whether those complications were surmountable or whether they'd always be distance neither could cross. His phone buzzed. Text from Victoria. We need to talk, in person, tonight.